If you've got big goals and a big vision for your dairy and your business, then you know that it takes intensity, incredible focus, and hard work. In fact, that's probably what's made you successful. But as you may also know, if you get too focused on one thing, on one bucket per se, all of that success can come at a cost. And the price you pay can be your family, your relationships, even your health. So finding a balance for your big goals and these buckets of faith, family, the farm, your health, your friendships is something that you want in your life, stick around because this one's for you. This is the Up-Level Dairy Podcast for dairy farm owners, managers, and advisors who are committed to profitability, sustainability, and excellence. My name is Peggy Coffeen, and it's my mission to bring you the conversations that will up-level your skill set and your mindset so you can be a top performer in the dairy business. 7,000 cows in 7 years. That was the vision Tommy Oesch from Swiss Lane Farms in Michigan shared on the #1 most downloaded episode of Season 1 of the Up-Level Dairy Podcast. And Tommy is jumping back on with me today for this very real conversation that goes deep into how he wants to not only run his business, but live his life, and about his 5 buckets of priorities: his family, his faith, the dairy, his health, and his friendships, and the constant intentional effort it takes for him to find some sort of balance among them all. In fact, there's so much good stuff here, I'm breaking it out into 2 parts for you. On this episode, you are going to hear about 3 of his 5 buckets: his family, his faith, and the dairy farming business. This one's all about being a husband, a dad, a dairyman, and a disciple, how his roles and priorities are different than his own dad's generation. And Tommy gets real about the insecurities that come up with stepping up to be a leader. This episode is sponsored by Affy Milk, a global dairy technology company that designs herd management software and products that allow thousands of cows to be managed on an individual level. Affy Milk can tell you what's happening with your cows and your milk, alerts you if there's problems, and pinpoints the problems so it can be managed quicker and easier. And stick around for a conversation with Jennifer Weber, Customer Success and Operations Director for Affy Milk North America, to learn how cow monitoring is saving dairy producers time and money and leading to healthy, more productive cows. Enjoy part 1 of this conversation with Tommy on the 5 buckets he balances behind the 7,000 cows in 7 years vision. You know, when you really look at the big picture of success and balance of business and life, of farm and family, and also your faith playing into that too, what does that mean to you?
It's my family, it's my faith, it's the farm, my business, it's my physical health, and it's my friendship. Those 5 things are all really important, and they all take investment and time. And I've heard it said before, and I believe it, and it's very convicting to me often, but the phrase, "I don't have time," is the same as "I don't want to," right? So I don't have time to take care of my family, or I go to my kid's game, or go to dinner with my wife, or go for a run sometime in the day that's very busy, is the same as saying, "I don't want to do that." And so those words, they come to me often as when I'm thinking about a day that I might want to mail it in or just take a break or whatever. There's always a bucket that needs attention, whether it's a friendship or my family or my faith, the church, my physical fitness. There's always a bucket that needs investment. And by saying I don't have time is the same as saying I don't want to. And so I always think about that. And I always think you can't say I don't have time. It's the same as saying I don't want to. And it's tempting, right? So that's kind of how I think about these things. And you can't overcommit your investment in any one of those things or something else will suffer.
So when we look at your 5 buckets that you just mentioned, and back in the episode we had you on before, where you talked about the 7,000 cows in 7-year vision, a lot of that was about the business. And so I think listeners that heard that, which was our #1 podcast for season 1 of the Up-Level Dairy Podcast, so that was a lot. I think they got a good feel for what your business is and the business model for Swiss Lane Farms. But just take a moment and talk a little bit about the family piece, and then we'll break out those other buckets. Who's in your family bucket?
the family dynamic that I have between my four walls. I have a wife. We've been married for 17 years. I have three kids, a freshman in high school, a seventh grader, and a sixth grader. If I think about how I had great parents, I grew up in a great house. Dad worked hard. Mom stayed home. I love that my mom, that they made that decision. She read to us. There was things. My dad always regretted that he never had time to read a book and didn't have time to do well in school. So he made sure that my mom had time to make that investment in us kids. And they were a great model, but our family's just different than that. Right. And it's interesting. My dad and his brothers, they were all partners in the dairy, and, none of their wives worked. And it's true. Like, all three of the partners at our dairy, our spouses make better money than we do. And that's a huge blessing. And they made a big investment in that. And so, it's really important to me to support my wife in her career. And she's an optometrist, and she's really good at it, and she does a really good job. And I like to say she supports my farming habit sometimes. With that dynamic, there is a need in our household for me to contribute to things other than, oh, dad just works. He brings home the bacon, and he doesn't do the dishes. He doesn't fold that's mom's job. Well, in our house, it can't work like that. If I tried to run our house like that, it would last about a week. I'd have an empty bucket, right? The other thing, my dad didn't go to games, didn't have time. He doesn't miss. And it's interesting, even my uncles, watching them with their grandkids, they don't miss a grandkids game. So, it's not that they didn't want to go. Right. And so, and I think if they could go back, they might attend a few more games. But again, they were the sole breadwinners in their homes, and the business needed them. They were doing all the work. It was different. So I guess that's a little bit about how the family structure is different from how I grew up, and how you have to lean into that. You have to just understand that, hey, I need to help around the house too. I might have to fold some laundry.
Well, and honestly, Tommy, though, I think what you're alluding to is what a lot of the rest of us can relate to as well, especially growing up on farms, right? Where we had parents that were very involved on the work on the farm. And there were certain things that kind of got delegated to one parent or another. And that whole dynamic of what did our parents miss because of their dedication and their obligation to their farming business? And how do we want to live our lives? How do we want to bring some of the good into the lives that we live as parents and as spouses? And what do we want to leave behind that doesn't serve the world that we're in or the people that we are becoming? And so I'm curious for you, when you think about your role as a dad and as a husband, what's your vision of success in those areas? Is it making every game? Do you kind of have a way that you balance that out?
Yeah. So no, you can't make every game. I still can't make every game. I make as many as I can. Right. And so when I hear myself saying I don't have time to go to that game, I better make sure that it's justified. Right. One of my favorite quotes, I'm pretty sure John Maxwell re-quoted somebody else, but he said, if you keep your household in order, you can do whatever you want. And I think that's another saying that I think about a lot. And so I think about, what is my household in order? That doesn't mean the dishes are always done. That doesn't mean the floors are always mopped. That means my kids have their hearts tuned towards the Lord. It means that my wife and I are happily sleeping in the same bed every night. It means that if I tell my wife I got to head out of town for a couple days, she doesn't feel like I haven't seen you in a week, or a month or whatever. And there's times when I'll come home in a rush to do this, that, and in between games and maybe a township meeting or this or that. And I'll be like, hey, babe, come in the bathroom while I take a shower. That's one of our most common meeting places is because that's when we have time to have a meeting about the schedule because things have changed over the course of the week, and it's just being intentional about that and staying tuned into how my kids are doing academically and emotionally and spending some time doing what they like to do too.
So you just said some big things as, as dad, right? And a husband, and even just what you just talked about with tuning into your kids and the word, their emotional needs. Like these aren't things that my dad talked about. And I'm guessing your dad didn't probably talk about them either. How do you bring that into the relationship you have as a father now to your kiddos?
Yeah, I think there's just a lot more focus on it in our generation than there was certainly with our parents. Emotional well-being is something that's just talked about a lot more. I think a lot of needs for kids can be met in the home and at prayer time at night, asking how you doing, who you hanging out with at school, right? A lot of those conversations, they come from a question. You got to ask your kids, hey, I'm not perfect. I'm not a perfect dad. There's times that I really screw up, but I think really leaning into knowing where your kids are at. As my kids are getting older, my abilities as a dad to know what's going on in their brain is harder and harder. But it takes just more questioning and more understanding. And, today my kids didn't have school. So I popped home for lunch and my son has a bunch of buddies over and they're just having a grand old time. And part of me, I've always wanted this house to be a place that my kids' friends were comfortable and wanted to come. But then they were all here and I'm like, they all need jobs. What are they doing? Like, I wanted to go take them to the dairy and put them to work, right? But it's like, no, this is what I've tried to create and now can't be mad about it. That's right?
Right?
So,
That's funny.
yeah.
You talked about prayer time with your kids and how that's part of that relationship that you bring in to having with them. But that's part of one of your other buckets that you talked about. And that was that spiritual bucket or that faith bucket. So what does that look like for you?
I grew up in a small church right here in town, and it's a great church. Attended with, my family, my entire extended family for 30 years. But my wife didn't grow up there. And when it was about 2012, our kids were starting to be old enough to know that to start to see how we were living our lives, right? I knew that if I wanted my kids to seek and follow the Lord, that I was going to have to be an example to them. And we were just attending church every Sunday, sitting in the back. We were not active. We weren't members. We weren't baptized. All of these things that I just had a lot of insecurity, eternal insecurity for one. I didn't feel like I was saved. And I didn't feel like I was leading my kids towards the Lord. My initial reaction was like, well, you just need to kind of get on board with what goes on at the church that I grew up in. It'll be fine. We'll just take the next step there. And she was like, well, can we just try a few other things? So, I thought, yeah, we'll do that. We'll try a couple other churches and we'll be back to the church I grew up in. Right. So, but we found a church in Lowell, which is kind of our hometown, and have been there every Sunday since. Since then, I've become involved in the leadership there. We've been involved with several what we call life groups or small groups because it's a fairly large church. And so we really believe that you do have to break it down into smaller bands of believers if the church is going to be successful and thrive. A couple of years ago, I had another guy my age reach out to me and ask me to be in a group where we read through the Old Testament in a year. It's like, I said, I don't have time.
Those words have become like they're like your check yourself words.
They are. So I knew, I wanted so bad to blow them off because I knew it was going to be every week, early in the morning. There's going to go another workout day. There's going to, another thing to schedule around. And I was like, I just don't have time. And I knew that that just meant that I didn't really want to do it. And so I felt really called to lean into that. And that's been really powerful. Um, we meet at 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. every Wednesday or Thursday morning. And it's been happening for 2 years. And our friends in our small group that we hang out every weekend, what those people are, our closest family friends. We do all of our socializing together, but that man-to-man discipleship group has been where some of the harder questions are asked, and there's a couple of those guys that are pretty introspective and pretty good about really getting into the deep water. And it's been really good for me. And it's not just been good for me. It's been good for my family. It's been good for my faith. And it's just been something that I've really come to value, to hold in high value.
Yeah. And so, okay, so now it's your regular practice that every week you spend 2 hours with this group and you guys do your Bible study and you prioritize it. And so I can hear what might be going on in someone else's head saying back to those keywords, I don't have time. How do you have time for that? Right. Especially those of us in dairy, right? How do you have time? And so for you, it sounds like once you got your foot in, you decided that it's now a non-negotiable for you.
It has become a non-negotiable. It really has, just because it's made me more solid in my business. When your faith is stronger, and I know every week we're going to get into some discussion about what we read this week. And so I do a lot of my reading via the Bible app. I'm trailing between the dairies, listening to it. And I know we're going to talk about that. So I know I better take some time and not just listen to another podcast or what's going on in, sports land or music. Like, I better get into the word and spend some time there. And as promised, if you spend time in the word, like the answers to life are there.
So what's changed for you? What are the biggest transformational shifts that you have experienced since you have made this intentional practice of Bible study and small group non-negotiable?
Oh, there's been a lot. I think my heart is softer towards my kids and certainly towards my wife. We spend most of our time talking about how things are going in our families and in our businesses, and a little bit of time talking about what we read and how that's applicable. But certainly, I think the most powerful thing has been in my marriage. I think businessmen that are struggling in their marriage, they can look tough, but they're leaving a lot on the table from a business intensity and horsepower if things aren't going well at home.
So going back to what you said before about if things are in order at home, how did that quote go?
If you keep your household in order, you can do whatever you want.
And so you found that having this dedication to fulfillment of that spiritual bucket is really, it's kind of like the big bucket from which everything else flows.
Yeah, absolutely.
So speak to me more about the business side and the dairy side, because going back again to what some of your peers in industry might be thinking, saying, oh my gosh, how does he spend this much time every week away from the dairy and in a discipleship group? How has it made you a better dairyman?
I think the same statement applies to your business as it does. Like, if you keep your household in order, if you keep your business house in order, you can do whatever you want to. It is applicable in both of my buckets, if you will, my family and my business. And there's certain things that just have to be honored in your business. You can have a lot of bad meetings and not get anything done. And so one of the things that we've really focused on is making sure all of our meetings are meaningful, right? And if they're not, we cancel them. If we don't need to have a meeting, we don't have a meeting. But there are certain meetings we do have every week. The system that we use to organize those meetings is really stringent, for one, and it's really structured. We know going into the meeting what the structure of the meeting is going to be. And we know if something's not an issue, we're not going to talk about it. We're not going to talk about things just to talk about things. We can have a phone call later if you just want to chat about, this, that, or the other thing. But meetings are for solving problems, and that's what we do in our meetings. And so that's been a really powerful thing, is to solve, show up to meetings, solve problems, and move on. Right. And know that things in your business are getting taken care of. Every team on our dairy has a scorecard, and almost every person in our dairy is accountable to something on a scorecard in a meeting. And I know that those scorecard numbers are all filtering all the way to the top of the business. The things on our scorecard are, things like how many pounds of milk were shipped every week. We know that number. How many cows died last week? How many cows did we get pregnant? How much working capital do we have this week? All of those things, like all the main important things, the profitability drivers on our dairy are on our scorecard. And so I'm just confident that if those boxes are all green, and they're never all green, right? Things are either on track or off track on the scorecard. And if they're off track, then we're going to spend time talking about it. If it's on track, we're not going to talk about it. Why talk about something that's on track?
So you alluded to it a little bit, but do you have a format or structure for those meetings that you follow, a template that
We
you
do.
follow?
Yeah.
And what does that look like?
It's the EOS model. It's the entrepreneurial operating system. It's a model for how to run your business, and it starts with a vision, your VTO, your vision traction organizer. It's like you start with your 10-year target, you work back to your 3-year picture, and then your 1-year objective. And then it's like, all right, what do we need to do let's start. And then you work all the way back to 90 days. What are we going to do in the next 90 days to hit the 1-year objective? And then all the way back further are the weekly to-dos. What are we going to do in the next 7 days? Every week we look at our 90-day rocks. We look at our 7-day to-dos. We look at our scorecard, and then we talk about our issues, right? Out of the scorecard and out of the to-dos often comes the issues, right? Like your to-do was to set up a meeting with this person. That's one of my to-dos. That's not done. Why is it not done? And then every week you talk about your rocks, your 90-day rocks. Is it done? Is it on track? Is it off track? And we know, and then we have a quarterly meeting and talk about our rock. We want to hit 80% of our rocks done every quarter. And you don't want to be the guy that has 5 rocks and 2 done, right? It shows up to the meetings. It drives a lot of accountability into our business of our leadership team. We call it our level 10 meeting. You rate the meeting at the end of the meeting, and you want to rate it a 10, if it's a bad meeting, I rate it a 10. You want to have meetings that are 10s, right? And then I'm part of 3 other level 10 meetings as the overall site manager of our dairies. So I attend all the site meetings, and I might not lead those meetings, but I attend. So, and they all run the same. They all have a scorecard. Everybody has a rock. Everybody has to-dos. So that's the structure. And it's been really, I'll be honest with you, I kind of bought the program a little bit. I was like, we can do this on our own, because we had to make an investment, right? Like anything, it costs us some money to hire a facilitator and go through the process. We had to read the books and do all the things. And
you had to change.
Thankful. Yeah, got to change.
And you had to change.
And so I'm so thankful that it's actually provided a lot of freedom to all of us, because we all know what's getting done and not getting done in our business.
One thing that comes to mind as you explain that whole meeting structure and how meetings are so pointed and have very clear objectives and expectations and outcomes, it goes back really in a way to that spiritual piece, because, one thing that I've just really personally felt God speaking into me lately is that, when we're called for stewardship, right? We're called to serve, we're called to steward the resources that we've been given. I think time and our attention is one of the resources that I know sometimes I maybe haven't recognized the role in stewarding that gift of our time and attention. And the way that you've explained putting structure into that to be very intentional, it's an act of service. At the end of the day, it's stewarding your time and attention so that you can be of service through your business to the people that depend on it, but also so you can be of service to your family and to the other people that you influence as well too.
And, I sit here and I talk about these things and sound like I have it all figured out, right? Like I have all these structures and all these practices and all these systems figured out. And, one of the things that I've wrestled with over the last couple of years really is, I've been pulled into leadership, not just of our business, of our church, and of all these other things, is this oftentimes overwhelming feeling of insecurity and disqualification. I don't have the highest level of education. I'm certainly not the most thoughtful person you'll ever meet. I'm a doer, not a thinker. And it gives, as a leader, it gives me a lot of insecurities as I see these other leaders that are deep thinkers and they're really introspective and they ask really good questions and they know numbers so much better than I do. And, it's there. I think we talked a little bit that it's the phrase imposter syndrome, right? Like I feel like, and I feel like it's, since I've talked to a few other of my friends, and I think it's sort of the age that I'm living in. I've heard Craig Rochelle and his leadership podcast talk about feeling like he was too young to be qualified to lead for most of his career. And then in a second, he went from being too young to too old, and now nobody listens to him. And so
Except us.
like, I do feel like, yeah. And so like, I guess I don't want to miss this window that I'm in that I feel like is a little bit of the sweet spot, like maybe the in between where I feel like I'm not old enough to actually, well, this is the age when I'll have the most horsepower, the most energy, the most ambition. I always question my own influence, right? So but maybe the most influence. So, and I think it's, a lot of my other peers struggle with the same thing. It sidelines a lot of leaders. It threatens to sideline me often because I feel like I'm not qualified to enter into whether it's powerful conversation or a high stakes decision. I wrestle with that qualification thing. And so, just as you're kind of asking me that question, it's something that I just really wanted to talk about because I do feel like there's so many people with talents that sideline themselves because they don't feel qualified. And I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it totally makes sense. And there's a fine line between humility, being humble, and also stepping up and realizing that we have to own our roles, right? And even when we look around, and to your point about being in the sweet spot, it reminds me of conversations that I've had recently with dairy managers, and we were talking about his ambitions to do more than what he was doing. He's like, is it selfish? That's what he asked. Is it selfish for me to want more? And I said, you know what? You know what selfish is? Selfish is when you look around and you realize that you have more potential than where you're at. Because selfish is staying comfortable. Selfish
Sure.
is staying where you are. And when God puts something on your heart and he puts you in a spot, even when you're uncomfortable, it's because he's moving you. Either you move when he says move, or he will move you. And, and I think that's the spot that, that you're in right now, or, kind of this age group that we're in, Eve, and what I'm hearing from you too, Tommy, and what you're hearing from others as well is, like we all question ourselves at times, right? And
Sure.
we can use humility. Is humility a crutch or an excuse? Like we can be humble and we can be grateful, but we can't use it as an excuse to not take the extra step to lead, to do the things that we know that if we look around and we say, who's going to do them? And you realize that the only one is you, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've come to realize that like my role in the boardroom, whether it's the dairy boardroom or any other position of leadership, isn't to be the guy with all the answers. That's never my role. And I'm never the guy to have the best analysis of a balance sheet. I'm not the guy to be to critically analyze uh, a partial budget. That's not my role ever in the boardroom, but my influence is often is inspiring those that have all of the knowledge that I don't to
Mm.
get it on the table and to be secure in their questioning and asking tough questions. Uh, so it's been interesting to figure out that my influence is not because I'm the smartest guy in the room ever, and in our any of the places I find myself. So I think that's been really helpful to kind of to be able to lean into where my strength is, and understand that you don't have to be the smartest guy in the room to be influential and get things done.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's your role.
That's my
Your
role.
role is to encourage and support and ask really good questions and help others see their own potential or help bring it out in them. This episode is sponsored by Affy Milk, and joining us today from Affy Milk is Jen Weber. Jen is Customer Success and Operations Director for Affy Milk North America, and she spent her career in the cow monitoring space, specializing in the technical and application aspects of cow monitoring systems. So, Jen, Tommy talked about finding balance between running the dairy business, but also leading a life where he's prioritizing family, health, faith, and relationships. And this is possible for Tommy because they've invested a lot in not just finding the right people at Swiss Lane Farms, but giving the people the tools that they need to be successful. And one of those tools is technology. And so let's take a moment to talk about how technology can help farms like Swiss Lane and others that you serve to eliminate some of the major pain points that a lot of farms experience. And so, Jen, how does Affy Milk help make that possible without sacrificing herd health or negatively impacting the bottom line of the dairy?
So first off, thank you for having me today. And yeah, happy to answer that question. So I think that there's a whole multitude of reasons that I could talk about today, but we would be here for all day. So I'll just speak to one of them because I think it has profound impacts, and a lot of dairymen think it's such a minor thing, but a really good example is the hospital pen. So the hospital pen is an aspect of the dairy that most dairymen cannot live without. But if we incorporate technology and we start to have a mindset shift, we can find that we can really maintain and increase the well-being and cow comfort of these animals by just shifting the way that we manage the hospital pen a little bit. So for instance, I like to say keep them where they are happy. So if we take a traditional setting where we utilize the hospital pen for all of our sick animals, what does that look like? So we take an animal that we know she's getting sick and we move her out of her normal routine, her normal space where she's comfortable. And now we have put her in a completely new environment where, let's be honest here, she hates everyone and everyone hates her. So she's trying to reestablish that hierarchy within her group. All the while, we are poking and prodding her, and we're expecting her to make this huge adjustment, usually over a week period, and also maintaining milk production and getting better and adjusting to her new life in this new group. It's a lot to ask, and we're now putting her through all these stress events. When we insert technology, we're able to find those cows, hours, days in advance, and we're able to now provide proactive treatments. We're ultimately reducing the number of touches on her because we can provide a proactive treatment while maintaining her in her normal group, and we never have to bring her out into the hospital pen. And that also saves on time, money. We're now increasing our labor efficiency because we don't need to pull her out of that pen. We're saving on antibiotic treatment costs because we're usually doing, a drench or something more proactive, so we don't have to put her through an entire withdrawal period. We're able to keep that milk because we're not having to withdraw her milk. And a lot of times we're also reducing any vet costs. So having just that one specific example is a really great example of that.
Yeah, that is a great example, Jen. And I appreciate what you brought up here about really what happens to that cow when she enters a sick pen. Not only is she under the stress of being off in some way physically and metabolically, but she also is now in underneath environmental stress from the other animals that she is now in that little herd group with. And so you bring up a really interesting point about this whole realm of stress that's much bigger than the sickness that then brings the cow to the pen in the first place. But also to your point of we often talk about looking at ways to save on labor efficiency and how technology can help with that. And so I'm curious for you, what have you noticed with some of the dairies that you serve of how the hospital pen looks differently after bringing in some technology to be able to find those cows before they get sick and ever even have to enter a pen? What does the sick pen look like after they've really got up to speed on utilizing technology to monitor health and catch those events before they occur?
Honestly, in a lot of dairies, the hospital pen is like the critical care intensive unit, as I would call it. So you're seeing those animals that are truly like need the vet's attention. So you can isolate them in this pen now, so the vet has quick access to them. And for the most part, I do know of some dairies that have completely eliminated their hospital pen. They just don't see the need for it. And instead, like I said, I would call it more of like an isolation unit because you've dwindled it down so much to the point where you don't have that many cows that need critical care. And I think that's a huge testament to really good herd management. I'm not saying that every dairy that doesn't have a hospital pen is great and every dairy that does have a hospital pen is poorly managed. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that when you're applying the technology correctly and you're able to find all those little nuances and really utilize the data to your strengths and increase that cow comfort and well-being, there's not necessarily a need to have that sick unit any longer. And just default having that technology and able to change that management where you're leaving the cows alone and letting them kind of naturally come out of it with proactive treatment. So when you're able to manage your cows like that, you just find that everything else is kind of that domino effect. You find your increased cow comfort, you find decreased vet visits, you find your decreased shot costs, and you just find that the overall environment of the farm is just a lot better run.
So you've talked a lot so far, Jen, about this health piece of the cow and how technology can be an asset for that. But that's not the only way that producers are using technology for their benefit. Talk a little bit more about the other aspects that come into play with the dairies that you work with.
The biggest three that I can think of that most dairymen want to talk about is health. We've already touched on repro and labor. So I'll talk to labor first. So I think that labor efficiency is a huge aspect. Normally, you've got, I don't know, it depends on how your normal routines are run, but you might have a crew of 2 to 3 guys that are going out and catching cows and setting up for breeding, whether that's injecting hormones or catching them to breed. You normally have one person on the front side of the cow, one person on the back side of the cow, and then you've got a floater that's usually helping to shuffle cows in and out. So when you insert now technology, more specifically the AFI collar that has the rumination heat detection, and if you insert a sort gate, which is also a part of our product suite, now you have the ability for one person to go in front of that computer every single morning, bring up the heat report, assign those cows a code, because we don't have to second guess. We know these cows are absolutely in heat and these cows are going to get bred today. Now we can assign them a code, they can get caught in the sort gate, and now depending on how the facilities are set up, you can either have 1 or 2 people at the most managing those cows and getting those cows bred. Whereas before you might have 2, 3, even more than that. So now we don't have to necessarily eliminate any positions, but now we've increased labor efficiency by labor reallocation. So now we can take that person that's now freed up their time and we can dedicate their time to a different part of the dairy that maybe have been overlooked or we didn't get to spend as much time focusing on that part of the dairy. So it really, really saves time and money from that standpoint.
Jen, so you just outlined this beautiful vision of being able to couple the monitoring technology through collars and integrate that into a sort gate system. I've actually been able to see that on a dairy that's been using AffiTech, and that is the dairy of Brandon Mendoza, who was on one of our previous Uplevel Dairy podcasts. And it was really cool to see that streamline of efficiency and how he was actually able to remove some of the skill set that he used to need for someone in that parlor to be able to identify suspect cows and to be able to flag those cows for treatment. that person didn't need to be there because of the accuracy and the reliability of a system that could do that through milk conductivity and then speak to the sort gate so that those cows would be able to be sorted out and have their individual attention as they need it. And so it's really cool that what you just outlined is something that is really a game changer for the dairies that are able to streamline their labor because of it. One of the things that I'd like you to share with us too, we've talked about the health, we've talked about the labor, but there's producers out there that also are seeing some great benefits of the tech when it comes to the number one goal of dairy producers, get cows pregnant, right? So how is that helping them?
Again, I'll speak on one specific aspect of that, which kind of ties everything together in the end. Actually, one of my farm management specialists and I, we were talking about this yesterday, and we had a good laugh because we had said the comment that timed AI is not necessary for first service conception. And he is a lifelong dairyman. And he said that when he first heard that statement, he about just was left speechless. He said, that is not a thing in the dairy world. Everyone needs timed AI on first service conception. So I thought that was a really great example because he has the lived dairy experience. And I think it's a very profound statement to make. But when you break it down and you look at the fact that Affy Farm software has the tools and the data to be able to compile into these reports. So one of the reports is the anestrus report. So if we take the anestrus report and we look at that, now we've identified accurately all the animals that are truly not cycling. So now if we switch our mindset into a individualized program for treatment of those animals, now we can customize the treatment for the anestrus cows instead of trying to apply a prophylactic treatment of a timed AI program broad spectrum across all these pens. And so when we do that, we actually find a lot of times that conception rates are actually higher because we're not forcing an animal into a heat cycle. We're letting her do it naturally. And most cows come into heat naturally between that 45 to 60 day cycle or days of milk range, which is when you're setting those animals up for shot protocols anyways. So why not just let her do it naturally? Because then you're reducing shot costs. You're increasing your labor efficiency by taking that person and able to reallocate them. When we start to treat those animals that are just on the anestrus report and we start to treat them individually, we're ultimately reducing our shot costs. We're increasing our labor efficiency by being able to reallocate that labor to a different task on the dairy. A big one that a lot of people don't think about is that we're maintaining that cow's milk production because now we're not forcing her to cycle with the hormone injections and she's able to keep that consistent milk production. So I would say that from a reproductive efficiency standpoint, if you are able to reduce or take away that first timed AI program and just let her come in naturally, right there, it's a complete savings of money. I mean, that it also trumps health, labor efficiency, everything else that comes with it. Just the repro costs alone is well worth it.
So, Jen, you've really outlined the ways that dairies are able to reduce costs and maintain cow health, get cows bred, and bigger picture, keep healthier cows around longer while making it easier for employees to do the job. And that all comes back to what we've talked about in this episode with Tommy from Swiss Lane is being able to live life how you want to live by making sure things are taken care of in your business, having the right people in the right places, and giving them the tools that they need to be successful. And so, Jen, anything else you'd like to add today?
No, I think if you want to know more, just contact one of our farm management specialists and we'll be able to tour you or run you through a demo. And I think that the way to learn the most about our product is to go see it. Like you said earlier at Brandon Mendoza's place, I think that truly being able to hear it from the dairyman's mouth and not me sitting here and telling you why it's so great, because it is great, but hearing it from the dairyman and why they use it every day and the reasons why they can't live without it, that's what makes me so passionate about this product.
Well, thank you, Jen. And we'll be sure to include links to find more of that information from Affy Milk in our show notes. And so thank you for being the sponsor of this Up Level Dairy podcast. And thank you to our listeners out there for joining us today. Thanks for listening to the Up-Level Dairy Podcast. Head back to episode 35 to hear Tommy talk about the 7,000 cows in 7 years vision. And tune in to our next episode to hear more on those 5 buckets and health, relationships, and how Tommy is finding practices and people to hold him accountable. If you like this episode, share it with a friend. Better yet, write a review and head over to upleveldairy.com to subscribe to receive new episodes right in your inbox. I'm Peggy Coffeen, and thank you for listening to the Up-Level Dairy Podcast.